G'day mateys, I am Jackaroo Turo, and on this channel I focus on Australian Aboriginal languages. So in my last video about complex verbs, I mentioned that in verb classifying languages we find that there are a number of simple verbs. Simple verbs with these senses that do double duty as class markers in the complex verb construction, so markers of verb classes. Well, this may be the case in most verb classifying languages, but it isn't in all of them. You see, verb classifying languages vary very much when it comes to the degree of the grammaticalisation of the complex verb construction. McGregor has found that with higher use, the complex verb construction becomes grammaticalised much more quickly, and what was originally verbs with these senses transform into class markers. So they become the markers of the different verbal classes, nothing more and nothing less. McGregor did not mention the Narra language in his book, and this is not strange because at that point, in 2002, Narra had not really been described. I started to study the language a few years later. And this here is what I found in Narra during my time as a PhD student. First here we have the Narra verbs with these senses. And secondly, we have morphemes. I think is the best description at this point. Morphemes that were used to create verbs. Seemingly used to create verbs. These ones here to create transitive verbs. And the lower ones to create intransitive ones. This is the only one here that does not take main stress. And the same here. The bottom one here does not take main stress. And you can see what these ones have in common, I'm sure. That would be the R morpheme. So anyway, Professor Alan Dench was my assistant supervisor when I was a PhD student, and he told me not to focus on verb classification. It would seem that he doesn't believe in verb classification, or at least he believes that it doesn't exist in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, where Ngarla is one of the northernmost languages. Alan Dench was the main supervisor for Janet Sharp when she studied and wrote a description of Nyangomara, Ngarla's neighboring language. In my previous video, you might have got the impression that people have described Nyangomara as being a verb classifying language. Well, no. This, as it so happens, is McGregor's interpretation of people's descriptions of Nyangomara. And it so happens that my old friend and colleague Brian Gatenbeek knows Nyangomara very well, and he is very critical of Sharp's description of the language, he feels it needs to be revised in a number of ways. So Sharp does not describe Nyangomara as a verb classifying language. This may be connected to the fact then that Dench was her supervisor. And as a PhD student, you need to sort of do what your supervisor wants, at least to a certain extent. So Dench told me not to focus on verb classification, but I saw clearly that we had something else going on in Narra than in the languages to the south that had been described by Dench. In those languages, there are much fewer morphemes that would seem to create verbs from non-verbs. Such morphemes are found in most languages around the world. They are called verbalizers, and that's how Dench labels them. Well, in Narra we had many more of these morphemes, and when there are so many, the question of course needs to be asked why. But I didn't focus on this, as I said, in my PhD work, but after I'd finished my PhD, I continued to study this. And this resulted in an article in the Australian Journal of Linguistics, where I describe the Narra system of verb classification. And I describe it as being a highly grammaticalized one. And in Narra, complex verbs and the complex verb construction is certainly used very frequently. You see, the complex verbs that I know of outnumber the simple verbs 6 to 1. So there are 6 times more complex verbs. And if we look here, it is a fact that a few of these are complex verbs in their own right. That would be julari, wudari, and at the bottom, parija, parilma, and this one, which is a very frequent verb, nganima. And you can see that we don't have very much in the way of similarity. By the way, this Narra verb is unfortunately unknown synchronically. That's unfortunate. But anyway, the only similarity is the one here. In fact, these are identical in shape, kari and kari. But this seems to be accidental more than anything else. You see, I have marked these two here because these are the two Narra irregular verbs. So this one takes irregular tense aspect and mood marking. This one doesn't. It takes the tense aspect and mood marking of the verbal conjugation it belongs to. So more than anything else, it seems that it's accidental that they have the same form. So these then are verb class markers. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to erase this and write down a number of languages with those that are highly grammaticalized at one end, those that have only started on this developmental path in the other, and a number of languages that are in between. So, be right back. And I'm back. And I ended up writing language families here for the most part. These two languages of the Catherine region of the Northern Territory, Wagiman and Wadaman, are considered to be isolates. And in the Daly River region, it is unclear how the languages are related, if they are related. So these here are all languages or language families of Australia's top end. We find Pama-Nyungan here at the bottom. And according to McGregor, the least grammaticalized complex verb constructions are found in the language families here at the bottom. So in the Wurroran languages, the Nyulnyulan languages, and the Pama-Nyungan languages he looked at. And this is of course interesting, because the complex verb construction of the Ngarla language is much more grammaticalized than those found in the 4 languages I have written on the board here. The most grammaticalized complex verb constructions we find at the top here. And then, according to McGregor, there is a certain amount of uncertainty. A certain amount of uncertainty in the midsection here as to what languages are more grammaticalized than others. Here I have written the number of verbal categories found. And you can see that the variation is great. We have between 6 and 12 in languages up here. And at the other end between 36 and 50 in these Pama-Nyungan languages. And by now I'm sure people are wondering, so these categories, what are they? What do they mark? What types of verbs are included in the different categories? Yes, I intend to come to that next. And that will be in the next video. So, see you later.